All right, last session of the day. How's everyone feeling? Fresh? Everyone wants to get this over with quick? Okay, so I'm going to be talking about unlocking agile potential and primarily focusing on doing this through organization design, capability building, and operating model, right? So this talk was supposed to be co-presented by me and Prachi. Unfortunately, Prachi couldn't make it, but for good reasons. There's nothing bad that's happened, so yeah, she couldn't make it. She's on the phone though, she's watching the presentation at least. And so that's Prachi. She has quite a diverse experience, and we've been working together at Exensio for the past 2.5 years now. We've been working at one of the biggest digital companies in India on some really hard problems across multiple teams on multiple domains, right? So I thought because it's the last Agile India conference, I thought I'll do a nostalgic introduction of myself. That's me and that's Naresh, circa 2010, right? And so the talk that we gave that year was called Monkey See, Monkey Do. And the idea was that we don't have all the answers, but we do know one thing, that the right way doesn't involve mindlessly following what the experts are telling us. And then the idea was to explore all the dogmas and ceremonies that have kept into Agile and things like that, right? However, we did a bait and switch in the last moment and we changed the title of the presentation. So that's what our presentation was actually called. The WTF there is not what you think it is. It's actually Agile way to fail. And so the whole presentation was about how we fail using Agile, right? So while looking up for these pictures, I came across a review of the conference, and they said, this is one of the things that they said, I like the venue even though there was no Wi-Fi. This is 2010, right? The next thing they said was being a post-Agile conference. Most topics were aimed at reflecting on how Agile has helped us in the past and where we are going. The operative word there being post-Agile conference, right? This is 2010, and now we are in 2025. By the way, this review was written by this guy sitting over here. And he's right there. That's sorry. It's just a matter of coincidence that that happened, that I found that pitch. Alright, so 20, 25, 15 years later, we're still here talking about Agile, right? Are we there yet? So yeah, moving on. Like I said, me and Prachi, along with a lot of us at Accenture, have been working at one of the largest digital companies in India. And we've been trying to solve some really hard problems. But the way we started off doing this over there is that we used to be a SWAT team for the executive management, and we would get parachuted into teams for firefighting, like at the very last minute. And we have to salvage the situation and ensure that we can, get the teams to deliver and meet the deadlines that they had. Over time, we transitioned from this firefighting mode to getting into a zone where we build capability within the team. So we want to do this much before, not at the last minute where, we have to deal with all the firefighting, right? So a lot of this has come out, that journey where we moved away from firefighting to building capability within the teams at that organization. So designing and creating high performing teams is not easy, right? There's so many factors here, and I won't touch upon all of it. I'll touch upon some of them. But a lot of people don't talk about this, especially when you come to Agile conferences. There's a lot of superficial talk about how to build teams. You need a cross-functional team, but the details are very, very tough, right? Luckily, we have some real-world footage of an Agile consultant forming a cross-functional team. So we'll go through that footage now, right? Can I get volume on that? Just give me one second.
Okay.
So there's our Agile consultant.
Yeah. Okay, come here.
You all can hear this? So we need a Scrum Master first, right? So that's our Scrum Master. Now we do a 2-day Scrum Master training workshop with them. Scrum Master learning the ropes now from the training and the certification. There we go. Scrum Masters trained after the 2-day certification. What next? We need a product owner. Great, the BAs can become product owners now. What do we need next? Engineers, right? We need engineers. We train them on agile practices now. There we go. Engineers are ready as well. What next? DevOps, right? We get the sysads to become DevOps now. Perfect. DevOps ready as well. And they're part of the cross-functional team now. What role's missing? There you go. That's our QA. QA was the missing ingredient. And now they're running their first Scrum after the workshops that they did. Everyone's playing their role perfectly, right, after that certification. Just look at all the happy customers there, getting all the value that they need. Done. The Scrum is done. Everything was great. All the metrics were met as well. And there are sponsors, right? All the sponsors are happy as well.
You play the guitar?
Yeah.
Okay, come here.
All right. The real world doesn't work like that, right? Tell me, who wants to tell me what sort of issues you'll face when you'll create teams? Anyone? Correct. Why do you think that was the case? They were already skilled. They already knew those instruments. You can't just get people off the street and tell them that you're a guitarist now. Here's how it works. There are 6 strings and this is what you do, and they won't be able to do that. What else? What are the other challenges you'll face when you'll create teams? No challenges at all? Go ahead, list a few more. Sorry? That's a great point, right? It's not just the individuals, it's how people work together as well. That's also something that doesn't work out. What else? Anything else? Resistance to change. That's right. They might not want to play the roles that we want them to. I'm sorry? They say 10 things, I understand 2 things. Okay? So that's communication issues basically within the team. Great. Alright, so what we did is that, you know, obviously these are issues that we faced as well, right? So we ended up building a practice-based framework, again based on our context, our experience, that we can use across the organization, and this has evolved over time across multiple engagements that we had there. So we split this up into 2 sections. There's org design and capability building. Within org design, there's designing the teams, basically how many teams do we need, what sort of teams do we need, etc., and things like that. And then we define what sort of team compositions are required, and that can vary based on the types of teams that we have, right? Then in terms of capability building, we define the capabilities that are required as well within those cross-functional teams. And then we figure out how to baseline those capabilities and then implement capability building strategies, right? So for each of these, we have a set of tools and models that we use. Some of them we borrow, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time, stuff that aligns with what we need to do. For example, team topologies, I'll maybe touch upon that a little ahead as well. For defining the team composition, we create a catalog that based on our experience that we can do, and there's something about our operating model that allows us to do that as well. I'll touch upon that also. There's a capability catalog that we created, and then we created competency assessments basically that we can use to baseline the teams. And then finally, we have some strategies about how to build capabilities with it. These are very simple, but it's stuff that people are not thinking through and in a structured way, and they don't necessarily have a, a very structured approach to this. So that's what we're enabling through this. All right, so I'll touch upon each of these and then get into them. So designing teams, there's a prerequisite to this, right? You can't just get in and start designing the teams. What we end up doing is that we do a value stream mapping, we do some journey maps, and we get very familiar with the teams that we are working with. And that equips us to then run workshops with the leaders to come up with the sort of team that we need, the leaders and the people who are going to be part of this initiative. And what we use there as a tool is team topologies. It's a very interesting tool. I won't get into too much details of it, but it sort of talks about the different types of teams that you need, because, and it's a very interesting concept because that's something that over time we've started noticing as well in the organization, that if everyone's doing the same type of work, you're being very inefficient. It helps sometimes, for example, having complicated subsidies helps to offload some of your work, especially if it's complicated for some other teams to work on. It helps to have platform teams that are, that are enablers for the other teams to build off of basically. The other thing that team topology talks about is 3 core interaction models between these different team types, right? And this sort of dictates how the teams interact with each other. Can they independently develop stuff? Do they need to sync up on things, etc., and things like that? And so, I won't get into too much details, but there's collaboration, there's facilitation, and there's X as a service, where you're just using them as a service and you don't have a hard link to them. And there are different tools that you can then use in all of these contexts, which I won't get into. But team topology is very well known. There's a book on it, there's a website, you can look it up. And it's a very interesting concept, and we found it very helpful in terms of designing teams. All right, next we get to defining the team composition, and what we've done here is we've built a catalog of the type of teams. We've worked at many different types of teams within the organization, and they're doing different types of things. There might be teams that are building mobile applications, so that you need a certain sort of team composition there. There are teams which require both web and mobile application developers together, apart from all the other cross-functional roles that you'll need. So we have a set of these team compositions that we create in this catalog, which we can readily look up whenever we get into a new team and present it, so that we can quickly bootstrap off of that, right? Then we get into defining the capabilities that are required. And what this entails is, again, a catalog that we built, and there's something about the way we operate that I'll get to maybe next, but it's a catalog of the roles and responsibilities that are commonly needed across the organization, and explicitly stating those for them. The knowledge areas that those roles will require, the behavioral and technical competencies that are needed for them. There are artifact templates that people need so that they can quickly bootstrap off of that, as opposed to every time thinking of this from scratch. There's also a progression for each of the competencies. We create progressions for what a beginner level competency will look like for a beginner. Let's take an example. If there's a product manager, as a beginner, you might not do certain things, right? You might not be looking at data. You might not have the competencies to do those things. So we define all that in a very clear way, and we lay that out for them to use. All right. The thing that I told you that it's interesting from the way we operate is that, and I won't get into all of the details, but in Exensio we focus on capabilities, and we do that by having a multidisciplinary approach, right? We have people in Exensio that have these capabilities, and therefore we can go in as a team, bring all of these capabilities together and help the organization build these capabilities parallelly together. And that's the reason we can create those catalogs, because we've done this enough times across all of these capabilities, so that now we can bootstrap off of that basically. There's also this part about how we operate in terms of the approach of first championing and driving, eventually to then having the team basically owning and driving while we help them out. And I'll touch upon that a little later as well, especially in the context of how we upskill people. All right, next up is baselining current state of capabilities. And we do that by having competency assessments. And there are three things that we do there. We do self-assessment, we do L1 and L2 assessment, and we do validation via artifacts, right? Because with the self-assessment, people can say whatever they want. It's the artifacts that tell us whether it is the case on the ground, basically. Now, there are a lot of challenges in this, right? When you get into a team, you're threatening, whenever you're making a change in a team, the team feels a threat, right? So a lot of this stuff is very interesting because you see all sorts of things coming out of this. You see people assessing people at a higher level, assessing themselves at a higher level and things like that. But the flip side of this also is that we've seen some interesting stuff happen where by virtue of doing this exercise, we get the leaders to recognize and acknowledge the fact that this is the case, this is the state of the capabilities in their team. And that's been very powerful for us, where they've sort of, they've been in denial, and then when we do this exercise, it just becomes very obvious that yes, we have a gap here that we need to address, basically. All right, then we talk about implementing capability strategies. Now that we have a sense of what our capabilities look like within the organization, we can now go and decide what to do of that, right? So we usually think of that as hiring, firing, retention, augmentation, and I'll get to each of them one by one, but hiring is not the easiest thing to do, right? It's one of the hardest things to do. And there are many challenges here. Sometimes it's budgetary constraints, sometimes it's the organization themselves don't have a reputation where they can hire people, if people don't want to, good people don't want to come to that organization. They can't match pay, for example. So there are so many constraints that you encounter with hiring, and it's usually a harder way to solve it. There are other issues with this, is that a lot of organizations, when they're hiring, they're doing it very passively. Like the top of the funnel is coming from HR. There's no one actively looking at the top of the funnel and optimizing that. And that just results in a lot of wasted effort in terms of hiring, and eventually them giving up and converting people that might not be the right fit for the job, right? So hiring is tough. One easy way to solve that is through augmenting, right? And there are different ways you can augment. You can get people from the outside to help. You can look at other teams within the organization. For example, if you have a budgetary constraints and you can't hire, then naturally you can immediately go and look at other teams in the organization that might have capabilities that you can use, basically, and see if you can get that. You can also, there's been situations where we've been in a team where they said they don't have any people, right? And the boss gets upset, and the next day there are 45 people. Out of nowhere they just appear, right, from a consultant. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem, right? Just adding people doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it creates more problems because now they're creating more noise in the system, right? So, but augmenting is also one of the faster ways to get where we want to, right? And one of the things that we do at Accenture is we get involved sometimes. We do hands-on work with the team, and we get involved with them and show them what good looks like, and we drive some of these things as well. So that helps us move faster while we take care of the other things, basically. Next is retaining, right? Now that if you have a sense of your capabilities and you know that there are certain roles that you will find difficult to find later, you have to retain those people. So this is about consciously thinking about how to do that. Firing, right? This is a harsh word, and I think it's one thing that a lot of companies and leaders shy away from. In our experience, more often than not, usually these decisions are taken much later than they need to. And by that time, it creates a lot of damage within the organization. Again, the firing is not about saying that the person is not, good or bad. It's just that the organization and the people are not the right mix, right? I've been in many contexts where we've had to let go of people who've then moved on to other organizations and they've flourished there, right? It's just that we weren't a good mix, and we're still in touch, basically, right? So, but a lot of leaders that we've encountered are very, very afraid to do this, or they do it very late. And we've seen situations where it's caused so much damage that now you're spending a lot of time and wasting effort to undo that, basically. So we always recommend to do that as soon as possible. And lastly is upskilling. Upskilling takes time. It's not easy. Upskilling is not just doing a training session or one workshop, right? It's an ongoing journey that has to happen. So how do we deal with that? I'll touch upon some upskilling aspects now. One thing that we find very common when we go into many teams is that the first thing they ask for is just come and do some training for us, right? Or we find a lot of consultants that come in and their first answer to everything is let's do some training or let's do a workshop, like one-off workshop. That doesn't work, and that doesn't work because of this model, and this model has flaws. It's not perfect, but it helps us think about how to approach upskilling, right? So the Dreyfus model talks about these skill levels and what their mental functions, right? How do they behave in these contexts? Just as an example, a novice when they have to recollection happens in a non-situational context. So it's not contextually that they are recollecting things basically. Similarly, when they want to recognize, they have to first break things down. They have to decompose it to figure out what's happening here. Whereas as you go ahead, people are looking at things more holistically, right? When you have to make a decision, at the initial levels, you're analyzing things, right? Whereas as you go ahead, you have an intuitive understanding of what the decision needs to be, right? You don't necessarily have to analyze. And then there's awareness, right? Either as a novice, you have to observe, right? There's some tools that people use in terms of, for example, there's a tool that says east, west, north, south. As a beginner, you don't know what to do. Like if I send someone if I send Columbus to America and said, tell me what you found there, he'll just catch what they saw, right? Just what got his attention. But if you tell him that look north, write down what he saw, look south, write down what he saw, right? Now you're looking at, you're monitoring things. Whereas when you're an expert, you observe things basically. So each of this requires a different sort of means, right? If your mental state is that you need tools and instructions, then you need to do self-study and you need training. If your mental state is that you need to execute instruction and analyze, then workshops might be a good way to do that. Going ahead, if inspect and adapt is something that you do, then coaching is something that you would require. And finally, you're already competent enough. What you need is just someone to bounce your ideas off, and some consulting might be the right way to do that. So upskilling is very, very contextual. Training is not the answer for every sort of upskilling problem, right? And you have to look at it in that context. And only when you have a baseline of the capabilities, you know what sort of people you have, that's when you can think about how to approach the upskilling. Pause here, any questions?
So the individual is not an expert, right? At a particular skill set, is an expert.
Correct.
So it's not like a blanket that you're an expert at everything.
Correct.
On a new skill, you may actually be a novice, but in terms of domain expertise, you may be an
Absolutely, yeah.
So you've got to try and find the right
Cool. This is the last thing that I'll touch upon, where we actually take people on, we create these learning journeys based on the baselining of the capabilities that we've done. We create individual learning journeys for the people, and again, we break this down into technical competencies and behavioral competencies, and both of them we approach very, very differently, right? And so this is again an ongoing process where we involve the L1s and the management as well, so that everyone's clued into what's happening. There's also some stuff that we do here, which is, for example, the one-on-one sessions that we do happens very contextually, right? A lot of times when we are within a team, there's always this paradox or dichotomy or this struggle between how do we deal with delivering versus how do we deal with the change program that's happening within the organization, right? And people are leaning from one towards the other. Whereas when we work with them contextually, right, then they are seeing things in that context, and it's not something that's separate. It's not something that I'm doing out of this context of delivery. It's happening in the context of delivery. And so that's something that we've seen that's been very helpful when we design these learning journeys for them. I think anything else that I want to touch upon here? The slides will be there, so I won't touch upon everything here, but similarly, we also do for behavioral competency, we do coaching sessions with the people one-on-one, and again, this is a long journey as well. And so, in fact, if you notice, there would be a closure, but then another journey will start, right, for that same person based on where they are at that point in time. So this is an ongoing, continuous journey, It's not something that we do one off and then it's done basically. So learning is a continuous process. Okay, I think I was really fast zipping through this. So again, this is not a silver bullet, right? This is not something that will work. You can't just take this lock, stock, barrel and just go and use it somewhere else, right? We've done this based on our engagement. We are constantly evolving this. After each engagement, we sort of go back and look at what we did, and then we figure out where were the gaps and how do we fill that in, and we keep updating our framework for our use, right? And the way to treat this is that this is like there are a set of viable ideas here that we spoke about, right? That you can experiment and build and create your own personal framework. There is no one global framework that will work for everyone. You have to figure out what works in your context in this case. There are so many aspects here that I didn't touch upon. There are so many dynamics in the organization that are at play, right? Therefore, it cannot be a one-size-fits-all framework for everyone. It always has to be contextual, right? And this is not something that we are selling. We are not selling you the framework. It's always will be something that we go into an organization, figure out what's contextually needed for them, and we help them with that. So I think I zipped through most of it, and I'm pretty much done. I didn't want to get into too much details. I know it's the end of the day, and I don't want to take too much time as well. Are there any questions? I'm open to having a discussion about, yeah, go ahead.
I'm actually curious because you said when you started out, it was a lot of firefighting, and then you transitioned to this. And I'm curious if you think like the firefighting is actually a necessary step to take just to get things under control.
It is. Sometimes it is. So it depends, right? And it depends on the context that we are talking about. Sometimes you'll go into a team, you have no choice but to firefight in that context.
Yeah. Like what I mean is, I think I've seen cases where people are focusing on capability build while it's still on fire, and then you have trouble there. So like I was wondering, like,
sorry, I didn't get that.
So let's say we're doing all this stuff because it's under control because you fought the fire, and now we're going to build capability and all this thing. But I've seen people attempt to do that while it was still on fire. So saying, hey, we're going to do all these skills and all this stuff, and then the house is on fire, so nobody can't pay attention.
And
so that's why I was thinking.
You think that's a good idea, or
no? I think that's a bad idea.
Exactly.
So I think like that itself is like part of the.
Correct. I concur. And so when we are in the firefighting context, we are just firefighting, and you have to then go back and then figure out how to solve this for the future, not for right away.
I also think, just to clarify, when you said we started with firefighting and transition to this, when you're new into an organization, you also have to prove yourself. You have to build your own credibility, right? You can't go and lecture people on how you should do things, right? Because no one, like, people are dying because there's fire, right? Like, no one's interested in your lecture or capability building or stuff like that. But it's also over a period of time you've built enough credibility within the organization where you get invited in situations where it's not a crisis yet. They're starting off something new and they would like to get it started on the right foot, right? So that's what I think Sandeep meant by we transitioned in a lot of cases from firefighting. So it's a slightly different context here.
So this is kind of maybe a cheeky question then. So sometimes I think that it's almost necessary for people to go through a fire first before you can do the other stuff. So even if, let's say someone invited you in because you had reputation from somewhere else, it's almost like that new area needs to go through something. Otherwise they don't really connect.
So they have to feel the pain is what you're saying. That's when
there's a little bit of you don't have, like, because we talk about like urgency, you don't have it.
Correct.
You heard a good story somewhere, but you don't really understand why we're doing this until you go through.
Absolutely, to understand the value of it.
Sometimes I don't think they felt enough pain yet.
So there's another important aspect around what Naresh was talking about, right? The time horizon with which we work with in organizations is also very different. Like with Exensio, we, for example, worked with this organization for about 5 years. That's a very different time horizon than consultants that come in and get out. They just do a training and get out. And that allows you to do different sorts of work, right? And in that context, I think it's really important to build that trust over time. There's a lot of agile stuff that talks about building, taking a pilot team and making exemplars. Sometimes that pilot team takes like years to get to that stage, and that's when they become truly a pilot team that can go out there in the organization, and then they don't need us. And we've seen that, for example, here.
We've seen cases where we've worked with a leader
But there are just playing devil's advocate. There are contexts in which the leader might have seen the pain, but the team that they're going to might not have, for example, and they can't appreciate what the leader is also bringing to the table. So we've seen those examples as well. Any other questions?
Any more questions?
Yeah.
I'm actually curious, like, sometimes I think like there's usually like almost like key people. So like even though we're developing people across, it's going to be like key influential people or almost like targets. Like you say, hey, I don't need, if I get, A, B, and C people, then they pretty much pull everyone else with them.
Yeah, so this is in the context of influencing people, and correct, and there's power structures, there's influence, there's all of that aspect. That happens, though we don't have, so if I step back, I come from this school of complexity known as complex responsive processes by Ralph Stacey. I think everyone will be familiar with Dave Snowden's work, which is also sort of inspired by Ralph Stacey's work, and then they diverged. And in that context, we think of complexity as, or global emergent behavior as coming from local interactions. Right? So it's the local interactions that matter. And so therefore you're working on those local interactions that eventually lead to global patterns of change within the organization. So in that context, working with those leaders one-on-one, having those conversations is very important. Similarly, and there are many aspects of building trust, like Naresh mentioned, right? There are sometimes where, some cases where we've seen where you do things that don't make sense right now, right? You're making certain trade-offs, but you do that to build the trust so that you can, reap the benefits later on. And again, that time scale comes into the picture, because you looking at a longer time frame, you can take care of those things as well.
Sorry, I was about to touch on that. Is the time horizon is a very interesting aspect, right? So we work with leaders and they'll be doing things that you find utterly stupid, right? And as a consultant, you may actually not appreciate that because you're looking at a very different time horizon. Like you're looking for something to be perfect now, but they're looking at a 10-year, 20-year horizon. They need to survive in the company for 20 years, 10 years. And so they're making a lot of decisions not to piss off people that they will potentially work in future, right? So there are things that people do which may not make sense immediately, but if you kind of like spend time with them, understand where they're coming from, you might actually appreciate and maybe even help them achieve what they're trying to do in a much shorter horizon, right? So there's like one particular group within the organization that is very troublesome for everyone to deal with, right? And no one wants to upset them. So they'll try and like do things which just don't make sense because they don't want to upset that group. And there are new leaders who have come in and they go and straight head on take on those teams and they disappear very soon, those leaders. Right? They don't survive in the organization. So one has to stay enough to kind of understand these dynamics and be able to then appreciate and help those leaders how to make those relationship with that troublesome group much better. Right? And so some of these dynamics becomes more evident when you spend a little bit more time and appreciate why someone's trying to make certain decisions. It doesn't, it's not very evident at the first when you look at it.
Correct. I was just going to add that you can't look at things from a very black and white perspective when you're doing this. Sometimes there's a lot of historical context that you have to understand first to be able to even make a difference.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because we're almost talking like all the stuff that are not on your slides.
That are not?
like a lot of the stuff is we don't usually talk about when we're presenting
Exactly.
our frameworks.
Yeah.
Because,
in fact,
because there's all these power dynamics things which
correct.
I actually do think are very important. Like what are the things you're doing around in the environment to enable you to even talk about, I want to upskill these people, and you don't understand how that's going to be received by various people, you won't even get the shot to do that.
That's a great point. In fact, a lot of these things that we do, the people react to them very differently. When you do an assessment, suddenly people are afraid that they're going to get fired, for example, right? But we are coming from the space that that's not the first option. We're obviously looking at upskilling if people have that, the ability, and it's a good thing for them, right? Where they can get new skills and things like that. There's also, to what you were saying, there are cases when you're talking about power dynamics, right? Maybe I'll skip that example altogether. Actually, it's a long story, but we can touch upon that separately. Yeah. Any other questions? Any discussion? Anything you want to say about your experiences with forming high performance teams? It's actually a good question. Does anyone want to talk about it? What is a high performing team? No? What would be some of the characteristics of a high performing team?
Well, not the characteristics. I would like to give it a different flavor to answer this question. So, back in the organization, when we say high performing teams, there's an example that we normally use. We are trying to create this way of representing two different teams. So in a jungle every day, every morning, you have two kinds of animal who wake up. I'm going to take a name like just to create it. One is leopard and the other is deer. Leopard wakes up thinking that if I don't run to my fullest, I'm going to starve. Deer thinks that while waking up after that if I don't run to my fullest, I'm going to be the food. Or you become a leopard or a deer in a team, you have to run. It's just the purpose is different. Or you either can have the momentum of leopard to go with, or you be in the anxiety of deer that you're going to get caught. Now it's a balance. The team that manages well is the high performing team, as per me. So that's equilibrium of leopard's momentum and deer's anxiety is what we call it as in our organization to define the levers of high performing team. When you say performing and high performing, it's basically the edge of tough situations to be managed with innovation or tough situations to be managed with simplicity. There's a principle number 9 is the most important that I always practice from last 12 years. Like we at organization, that simplicity is the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, which is essential. I think despite in the age of AI, the high performing team have to bring in that with a good equilibrium. That's what I feel the high performing team is.
Interesting. There's a dimension of work not done, which I can talk about it. The opposite of a high performing team is a team that doesn't care about what they're doing. They're just doing what they're told, right? They're not using their brains. It's someone else's problem to worry about whether what I'm doing is of value or not. And one thing that we've been trying to change in the organization is to get everyone to own this, right? so that everyone's thinking about delivering value as opposed to just doing stuff basically for the sake of doing stuff. Anyone else want to share? Maybe over drinks later. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
So,
were you done? You were saying something. Thank you.
so I'm not sure if it is going to fit in high performing team definition, but I feel a team who is actually doing the daily work, and if there is a situation where they need to stop, instead of actually be in that race of, say, if you're stuck, you develop something fancy and improve it, again run and then achieve something, right? So instead of actually, instead of introducing new things, if you are stuck, think about it, take a step back, and then do the right thing. Instead of actually introducing something which is maybe not relevant to the situation what you have right now. Maybe it's just a kind of a break you need, right? So it's a kind of high performing team in my case, or in my view, instead of say introducing something new and then be in that race, fail again and again, add more things. So that's my view.
So step back and reflect what
Yeah,
they're working
that's
on.
true.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have just so many examples of, and again, it's connected to sort of the product stuff that we do in the organization. I can give you a few examples. For example, there is a product that doesn't have localization. So business says, I need to go to tier 2, tier 3 cities. Localization is table stakes. Right? So suddenly there's a backlog built which will take them a year to run through. It's hard to do localization when your app is not built from scratch to do that, right? It's a lot of work. And when it came, the backlog was already built. That's when we got into this team. And we were like, so what's the problem that it has solved? So they tell us that businesses that we cannot go to tier 1, tier 2 cities if we don't have localization. So say, okay, if that's what we want, we can always experiment. And we told them to use Google Translate, 3 lines of code to embed in there. And they could launch it the next day and they can start validating immediately whether they need to do that or not. But if they were not using their brains, if the team is not using their brains, they would have just gone and built all of that stuff for a year. And so much waste would have been generated from that. So lots of examples of that. Sometimes it's also interesting where from an engineering perspective, so we've seen business dying and the business is now pivoting. And they're saying that to pivot, we need this X thing. And this whole team is going and building out this X thing. And all the engineering team had to do is show us the contract with the new customers that you have that justify the pivot that you're making. And the minute we open the contract that they have, there's no way to justify what they had. And that business sort of died in a month after that. But before that, they ended up building so many things, right? So I think one aspect of high performance team is everyone cares about what they're doing. Everyone in the team cares about what they're doing. And I think that's very important. A lot of us have spent time in startups. We had our own companies as well. And I think that's one characteristic that we appreciate, when everyone's not in silos thinking that's his problem, that's not my problem. It's when everyone's thinking about it's our problem. I think that's a good indicator of a high performing team. Anyone else?
Think that they are part of any race. They'll just get into a work and not only about the business targets but the NFR innovation. They'll make a proper balance among them and release the things effectively. And there are some things or some features which are not as per the expectations of business, but those features can be effective at some other business model, so which grows very effectively. So
Nice. So I think the engineering teams themselves come up with ideas for business and then they implement them.
and
Nice.
at that time, engineering teams have capacity to explain the business that this is the most convenient thing, or how these utilities can empower the business more effectively.
Nice. I've seen some examples of that as well. Yeah, that's a very good point. Where they're going up to business and saying, hey, maybe you could try this, and that sometimes does really good as well. How are we doing on time? Yeah. From ChatGPT.
Let's see what ChatGPT has to say, right? To 4.5. A high performance team is a cohesive group of individuals who are deeply committed, goal focused, and consistently delivering superior results. Such teams exhibit strong collaboration, clear communication, mutual trust, accountability, adaptability, and alignment towards shared objectives. Members complement each other's strength, proactively address conflict, and continuously seek improvements, enabling them to achieve outcomes that surpass standard expectations.
Looks like we touched upon quite a few of those in our discussion.
That's it. It's that simple. I'm sure GPT will also know how to do it.
Yeah. I'll come. When AGI comes, will come. Anyone else? Are we doing on time? We're already out of time, I think. Yeah. All right. Thanks, folks. I know I didn't touch upon a lot of details. Feel free to come and catch me. There are artifacts for a lot of the things that I spoke about that I can share with you all. Feel free to come and talk to me. We can do that later. All right. Thank you.